Thank you so much for the invite. Observing all protocols at this point in time. If you are hearing me, please just give me a thumbs up so I know you're following me. I must say it's indeed a pleasure for me to be here today. After 1 year, we are indeed blessed. Let us not forget those educators, both here in the United States and Jamaica, who may have been affected by COVID. The critical point is, when I was invited to give this talk, I pondered for a moment in greater criticality the impact of COVID on education. I also pondered what things would be like after COVID, because this time has been challenging. But let me tell you a little about myself. I hope everyone assumes that I'm 100% Jamaican, that I've tried to maintain my accent as a Jamaican since 2001 and leaving Jamaica, that is. Hence, I traveled to Bethlehem Teachers College and did an interview there and decided to attend there. So you see, in essence, you could have been first choice, right? But on a different note, I have been teaching since 1991. And before leaving for UK, we did not have smartphones. We did not have anything that was of technology of that sort. Internet cafes were the order of the day. And I don't know if anyone has sent a telegram from this group, but have sent several. So as we look back on our history of technology, I must say my reflection starts in 1995 when I visited New York and saw actually internet. I asked someone what was it and he said it was Yahoo. I did not understand a thing. So as we go through, I want us to look at where we have come. And today I want us to explore and focus on our readiness for the crisis that came and our readiness for future crisis. Today I want to examine the bridge of the digital divide on emerging technology within the context of COVID and after. What did really COVID teach us and tell us as educators, policymakers, and teachers about our readiness to adjust? How teachers are prepared to meet these radical shifts is going to be a conscious thought throughout the presentation. And I want us to examine new and emerging technologies and pedagogies coming into play during and after COVID. And when I say this, I want, as you go through the presentation, to consider the issue of transformative technology in teacher training curriculum. So before I start, I had a few questions that I wanted to ask. And if you could take a minute to the poll questions, you should have a poll coming your way. But I wanted us to set the stage on where we are as it relates to our thoughts. And if we could release that poll, that would be nice. And then we could come back to the results at some point in time. I want us, before we move on, to understand the concept of the digital divide. And when I talk about the digital divide, I'm talking about a concept that was coined in the 1990s. Simply put, the digital divide suggests that not everyone in our society will have access to the required technology. Within the digital divide, there's limited access to internet, and this approach leads to inequality. I'm sure you would understand that the digital divide can manifest itself in Jamaica within a socio-economic context. The reality is that technology divide has separated those who have and those who have not. And we saw this in COVID. So we're setting the stage for COVID. In Jamaica, if you do not have the technology, I'm sure you understand the long lines that you'll have. Because many individuals do not have the technology or the skills to navigate. Hence, they are left behind. So when we think about the digital divide, as teachers and teachers in training, we have a part to play in closing that digital divide. And within that context, I want to bring in the thought of regional governments working together. So that is where I'm coming from. But before moving on, I want to set the context. I have used this picture to indicate really my love for Jamaica. But let me say that COVID came and COVID has caused a lot of transformation in our education system, as we heard earlier. And let us see what UNICEF stated regarding this. And this report was published in 2020 November. And UNICEF feared that vulnerable children would be left behind. The UNICEF report also indicated that the impact of COVID will affect our children for years to come. And let us not forget it's an impact because a lot of students missed out on instructional time, and there's cause for concern as it relates to that. Teachers, therefore, will need to be attuned in such a way that they can help narrow this gap and this divide. UNICEF also argued that regional governments should increase education budgets and give special attention to children who are marginalized or at risk of dropping out of school. So as we decided to use technology, there was an issue that compounded our use of technology, and it was those individuals who are vulnerable and do not have access. Just think for a moment that teachers, parents, governments, and our nation's children were in fact in a crisis, and it was difficult to manage. And if we look further on another UNICEF report that focused on Jamaica, it stated that students were not engaged during school time, and that was a major concern from the report. For example, students were not completing tasks, and I'm sure many individuals were affected by this, and those who were on teaching practice experienced that sort of framework taking place. And of course, you must have heard about the students who decided that they would sleep in late because for them, this was not a real class or just not turning up. The main concern, as outlined in the report, is that the lack of facilities, devices, and internet affected our children dearly. And let me bring this into context. There are some things that colleges can address, and there are others they cannot. But within this construct too, there was an emerging thought. The pandemic showed a spotlight on what Jamaicans needed to do, Jamaican teachers, and presented a digital divide, but moreover, it found our teachers and our leaders moving towards the deployment of instructions that could at least be a safe zone for education to continue. We saw teachers using their creativity to narrow the gap. In many cases, we must recognize that these teachers also created spaces in their homes. They also created spaces around their dinner table, to ensure that education continued. And of course, children and their families created spaces within their home to ensure that the education moved on. We must also commend those individuals who opened their homes to ensure that other students could have access to internet. And I was so impressed with what was happening, and I saw that teachers in Jamaica were so creative in using WhatsApp. And I asked a friend of mine to tell me, how are you using it? And as a result of that, I created this infographic, using WhatsApp for your teaching. And I thought it was splendid. It was also clear that parents and teachers now had their personal spaces invaded by what was happening. In the light of this, we needed protocols of how engagement would take place. And sometimes we had none. We had none because we saw where everywhere in my university we had to be issuing protocols on a daily basis, changing up things to ensure that students were engaged. And when we look at it, we also need to understand that teachers within the Jamaican context and globally became advocates as it relates to their students having access to technology. And finally, when I really consider the context, I was forced to acknowledge that a gap between pedagogy and technology was increasing in these learning spaces. That was cause for great concern in relation to what I was saying. So as a result of that, during and after COVID, teacher preparation must consider protocols for engagement as it relates to students' learning. I am sure you heard about Jamaicans and Jamaican parents not properly attired walking behind their children's camera. I'm sure you heard about parents telling their children to wash up the dishes while an online class was taking place. The reality is that COVID revealed that teachers need to navigate all teaching and learning modalities, whether it be face-to-face, online, or blended. So therefore, teacher training curriculum must reflect that. The ability to navigate these modalities, of course, will allow teachers to deploy the protocols needed for that context. Based on what I have learned over the period of time, I strongly believe that there needs to be a balance between pedagogy and technology whenever we are deciding to go down that road. And I'll touch on that a bit more. It is clear when I examine the whole system, I was forced to do another infographics, which this one talks about really don't throw pedagogy overboard in times of crisis. And I had to do that one. So as I go forward, I want us to consider the value of technology to teacher education. Of course, COVID came, it impacted us. But when we critically reflect, on what needs to be done, we have to say, all right, you know what? There needs to be some transformation as it relates to teacher training. And I say this because when I went to Teachers College back in Bethlehem, I could ask someone to make a chart for me because I had no penmanship. And they would say, Jowallah, your chart is ready. And I would collect it in the morning and go and put my chart up. No, I have to be alert as it relates to using that technology of the day. So we must transform teacher training to make sure that it's fluid enough, that it can be seamless enough too, to navigate the emergence of new learning and teaching approaches. Which brings me to another point. As we look at the critical point, the human rights to education is possible without access to the use of information technology, but more effective with technologies. I somewhat challenge that question because I think if you do not have access to the technology, it's an issue of inclusion. If you do not have access to the technology, it's an issue of equity, because if some students in your institution have access and others have not, then we are in a problem. Let us explore further the integration of teacher using technology in teacher education within a practical framework, because I think that is so important for us to look at. And as we go forward now, why do we need to ensure access as it relates to technology into teacher education? It is clear that increasing understanding of concept can be done via the use of technology. So if teachers are going to be using the technology in the classroom, why not facilitate that in teacher training colleges? When technology is used in teacher education, rather, it allows for the teacher to, of course, engage in interaction and engagement. The issue also is that the use of technology will speed up the acquisition of knowledge. I heard this term a few years ago, who needs school when you have YouTube? And I somewhat question that. You have the content, but you know what? You put something in a search engine, it pops up 10 different responses. You need a teacher to navigate, to guide, to scaffold that interaction. And teachers need to understand how knowledge is going to be created using new and emerging technologies. So it speeds up the acquisition of knowledge within the teacher training program. Let us not forget that not all teachers learn at the same pace. If they go into the classroom, they're expecting to teach students and differentiate. At teachers' colleges too, we need to apply those concepts, because not all individuals entering into teacher training colleges will learn at the same pace. Which brings me to another point, of course. When we talk about integrating technology, we must remember that those children that the teachers are going to teach are called digital natives. That means they have seen all the technology there before. You can't get a student or student coming in to grade 4 or 5 asking them to use a phone that has a dial on it. They will ask you, what artifact is that? So it brings me to another point, because I want you to take a road with me to another aspect. And this aspect is really about the cutting edge classroom simulator at UCF. I'm sure when COVID struck, everyone wondered, how would my teaching practice go? And as teacher trainers wondered, how would I facilitate the training? In many cases, educators need a space to practice. Therefore, we can use technology to guide the pathway. So at UCF, what they have is a virtual classroom. Teacher has a projector there. Image is projected. You have someone controlling the system in another room. And you have children who are avatars behaving in a certain way. And as a matter of fact, without explaining further, I want to show you this video as it relates to what's happening for it to explain itself. So bear with me. Just look. All right. So within that context, there is the move to have the value of technology to educators. Here you saw technology if you were not able to go on teaching practice or design that schedule for your students to go on teaching practice. If you had a collaborative zone across teachers' colleges in Jamaica and that software, students could actually go into that class and practice. The person who spoke earlier, he said, teachers really need to go through the practice process in order to feel comfortable in a classroom space. Just imagine someone who has never taught before steps into a classroom in Jamaica, and in total confusion, you have the examiners coming in to evaluate the student, and the student has never really acted out a lesson. So it's really radical transformation, but this technology has been around since 1997 and has improved. So what I'm saying is we need to have sort of movement towards probably private and public sector coming together. So when we look forward now, we're going into the mission where the value of technology to educators. And the Gallup report stated that educators use technology to search for information, to create projects, to create personalized learning, and that is specific learning journeys for students who need that support, assessment of learning, communication, and of course, learn new content. You know, when you went to Teachers College in my days, you went through, but at the same time, you had to acquire the content when you started. So at this point in time, there's a question. Technology will it afford us the ability to acquire the content needed? Yes, but we need the critical eyes to also evaluate those. So when we look at current trends in education now, we have to think about our teacher training program. Teacher training program now thinking about or designing ways to think about adaptive learning. And that is very current in United States now, where adaptive learning is a computer generated sort of system where the student is allowed to go through a personalized instructional design computer-based learning pathway that will make adjustments to adapt to the child's learning style. And within that context too, it's also using artificial intelligence. I don't know if you know the power of AI, but I see AI really moving beyond. And artificial intelligence is used on your phones. You wonder why they send you all these videos all the time? Because they have set an algorithm that will track you and send you the same content that they think you want. So those issues are part of the learning system now. So when you look at AI technology, I am going to say to you that presently, students can get feedback from artificial intelligence system via robot. So for example, if you are in a classroom here in the United States and the teacher has large class sizes, especially at university, AI assistant can give feedback. But just remember, it is possible that an AI system could also be the evaluator of lesson plans in the future. And you know what I'm saying? The AI is looking at keywords and making sure that you have met the objectives, the student profile, and so forth. It's possible. And it's coming. So as we look at the AI system, we also need to understand within teacher training, there is a new pathway for open educational resources. And as teachers in training or teachers needing professional development, we have to be able to assess the educational resources. And of course, in our assessment, we need to ensure that we are competent open education resources to allow us to deploy them. And of course, extended reality. This is a new form of technology that is coming here, and I'm saying, you know, it's advancing. And in our context too, we have to see where we are going. So as teachers in teachers training colleges, we need to explore these new ideologies as it relates to learning technologies and integrate them into teacher training. Which brings me to another point. And the point is pedagogy and technology. And let me say, this stick man has traveled the globe. I and my friend Dr. Bennett, we have done a lot of work together. And we created this stick man some years ago. So when you think about technology, you have to think about content. You don't think about technology before you think about the content. And as you're thinking about the content now, you're looking at what is the best technology to use for me to outline my content. So as you think about the technology, you're going to the next stage. What cognitive processes are going to be involved when this technology is used? Is it going to take students to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, or it's going to take them to the lowest level? And then you introduce the technology and also make sure the technology gives you your desired learning outcomes. These are important. So whatever technology you throw in, there must be a balance between pedagogy and technology. Too often I've seen where individuals have created tools and so forth, and when you ask them, how will it assist in the teaching and learning process, they can't understand. They can't explain. And I have a theory, by the recession that took place in 2007 going on to 2016, a lot of individuals were displaced. Now, if you go to conferences, the amount of technology that you see, well, you can't explain. And when you ask them about the teaching and learning part, they are unable to explain. So when you consider using technology in teacher training or teachers using technology, we have to think about access. We have to think about access because will the students in our teacher training college have access to the technology that is being used? Will there be a balanced approach? Is there appropriate training? Is there appropriate research? The first time I was in Jamaica, I was doing my degree with University of the Caribbean, Northern Caribbean University, and one lecturer asked everyone to point their mouse to their board or to their screen. And he had a bigger screen, and I saw some individuals literally hold their mouse in their hand and they were pointing at the screen, not knowing it was actually their computer screen. These were teachers being exposed to technology for the first time. And as we think about this, we also need to think about the transformative nature of technology, because technology is going to transform our nation. Because effective use of technology can use in such a way that it's transformative in the sense that it leads to better well-being. In summary, technology that should be deployed at teachers' colleges and then into the classroom should lead to a change in the lived experiences of those who are going to be educated. So what I'm saying is teachers need to be equipped in such a way. So if we go further, of course we're going to have barriers. Fear of technology. Some teachers are very fearful, but I did a training session in Jamaica the other day, and I must say that there are some teachers that are challenging and taking on the technology and using it to the extent that I say 100% effective. I saw one individual use a Google Classroom in such a way that I said, wow, she's very good. And when I Googled this individual, I realized the individual had gotten an award for outstanding teaching. So it tells me that there are some good practices going on. Some might not want to move from the traditional approach, but I want to say that whatever changes will take place, we have to transform. And there's the issue of resources. You might say to me, you're talking about implementing this and you have not considered the costing and the staffing and so forth. But here's my thing. There's a social cost for not investing. The social cost for not investing means that individuals will be left behind. We are already behind. So therefore we need to advance it, advocate, and have those alliances with private and public sectors in our society. And this should be a national initiative. My issue is, as you advocate for internet connection, I would say at this point in time, go for 5G. Don't go for broadband, because 5G is the new form of technology, and all these artificial intelligence things that I've been talking about will be operated through 5G. So why Africa has said, we're skipping this broadband, we're going 5G. They will advance their technology in such a way because 5G allows for so many things to take place within teaching and learning. And many companies are looking forward in going that area. So another point, as I go through, when you think about your teacher training curriculum and you're thinking about employing a pathway for curriculum change and transformation, it would be a travesty for me not to mention the need for ethics. Because teacher training programs and teachers going out there must know about the issue of their responsibility in using technology in a responsible way. You have to consider data protection issues. So when you're thinking of pedagogy and technology, with the technological part of it, you have to think about ethical standards as it relates to access, the digital divide, inclusive practices, and so forth. You can't just include technology in your class that takes students to another zone and expose them to content that they should not be exposed to. I was using my virtual reality thing a few years ago when I went in a virtual room and I was exploring, and what I saw, I had to practically jump through, just turn my device off. So I want us to consider ethics, because I think teachers' colleges, as teachers go into training and come back and give feedback, they can give such wonderful news of what can be done to enhance professional standards as it relates to a document that talks about the use of technology responsibly in education, and that has to do with a lot of data protection laws. I want to kind of wrap up at this point in time because I want us to consider critical technological education. within the context of using technology, we have to understand that technology should be used in such a way that it will impact the students we teach and the society and schools. Because if you do not have access to that technology, then again we'll be left behind. So I'm going to say this again, teacher training institutions must be a part of this. So as we go forward, there needs to be a pedagogical shift. We need to model teaching and learning as it relates to the technology that is being used. We need to understand that teacher training needs to be radically shifted in such a way that teachers will be engaged in technology-based teaching and learning in such a way that it becomes habitus. It's their practice. We need to understand that technology will be an important part of the teacher preparation program throughout the world. As teachers engage, they should constructively use technology to advance themselves and those they will interact with. They should also provide that technological environment that would stimulate learning, their own learning, of course, as well as those they will engage in. And these simulations should be real-life situations. So therefore, as teachers and teacher trainers and individuals going out into the classroom, we must use technology in such a way that it creates that zone for creativity. Within that paradigm shift also, I would say we have to give attention to curriculum. So therefore, teacher training programs are critical for the successful integration of technology in schools. It must start there. Therefore, teacher preparation should not be based on computer literacy, and that's a keynote, but should prepare teachers to use technology independently and in an authentic way. They should have the program designed so technological skills are key. Therefore, teacher training programs should be dedicated towards developing competency and technical skills. Of course, this is going to take reform. And of course, these reforms will need to understand that, yes, by doing these things, we are creating the space needed for creativity. So I challenge everyone here to think creatively about what needs to be done. Think about a framework, a balanced framework when you can merge things together. Because I want to go further and I want to highlight a project which I've shared, and it's wrapping up this at this point in time. And this project is really my virtual reality project. And here I am, I'm an avatar in the system. And as I navigate, I must say I go through these spaces, I'm able to interact with objects. However, I don't take this technology lightly, because I'm saying to myself, what is the teaching and learning process involved? How does this technology balance with content and the pedagogy? And of course, the balance is needed. I wanted to really show you a few things that I had. And if it's small, this is what I'm using. Just showing you the Oculus Quest. It's one of the latest. You might not be able to see it, but I'll send the pictures to you at some point in time. Therefore, this is just the Oculus Quest. This device and others I've bought over a period of time just to explore. But I want us to look at something that I did with the School of Nursing. And within this context, the School of Nursing wanted us to somewhat carry out an experiment where they could label in 360 image something that was taking place. So let me just bring you to that one. And you should be seeing my screen now. You're still seeing my screen loading. So what this is actually, it's a 360 image of a nursing room that has children in them. And each one of these icon represents information. This is a free resource that you can get, and you can use it to create anything you want to create. It could be a history lesson. I could see people labeling, putting YouTube videos and so forth. But I want us to, let me log out of this one. I want to go to another one. So I'm going to take you back to my slides. And there's another one that I wanted to show you. And this actually is a colleague of mine. A few years ago, I did some work as it relates to teaching language back in UK. And I decided this was one of the best subjects that I taught, really. And I wanted to recapture something. So here it is, a creative writing sort of engagement. And here we have a friend of mine, her name is Sue Bauer, deciding that she's going to be actually the person who's murdered. So I want to take you to that scene because I'm just showing you the extent to which teacher training needs to reflect new and emerging technologies. Here we go now. So within the scene, you can practically move right around to examine and explore certain objects. So here I am moving the object around, and of course, here's the scene. Click on the picture, it shows what's happening, evidence of showing American company involved in deforestation of the Amazon. Here, it's a video. So what I'm saying, you can play so many things and you can actually build a story. This actually was used to develop a scheme of work that kind of showed the creativeness of what ThingLink can do. These resources are online free. However, it's just not be used without considering the technological affordances in relation to pedagogy too. All right. So let me summarize by saying, I think as teachers at teacher training colleges and institutions across Jamaica, we need to be active participants in research and leading practice as it relates to the transformation of the use of technology in our education system. That picture below was, I took that in 2014, 15 to be exact, in Jamaica. And I visited a school. I told the principal that I would bring some VR headsets. By the way, these VR headsets are no longer within the construct of what I do because they're a bit dated. But when I turned up at this institution, I was trying to tell the teacher there in charge of that class to watch me as I demonstrated. And to be honest, I couldn't get her. She was so involved in the technology that I said, wow, she's not even learning how to use it effectively because she has never been exposed. So here I am. Here's another picture when I went to Sam Sharp Teachers College 2 years ago, giving an instruction workshop on the use of VR technology because teachers were there. Some of them were very used to it and others did not ever touch the technology. For us to advance, teachers in teacher training institutions and in service too will need to be able to access technology so they can build sound pedagogical framework that will help them navigate the classroom as they go forward. So my closing critical questions are, to what extent is there a digital divide in Jamaica based on the content I provided? And I want you to consider the context of teachers in training. Do they have equipment, their smartphones, and necessary stuff for us to move forward? And how can teacher training education programs be designed to ensure that there is a balance between pedagogy and technology? As you summarize it, can be summarized in this question below. What are or what will be the teachers for the future require to have? What skills they will require to have to navigate the current new and emerging technologies in our education system? I'm going to close at this point in time, but just remember, there must be a balance between technology and pedagogy, and we must operate this balance within a critical, reflective framework. Thanks again, and thanks for the invite.